Hello, everyone. This is Victor Dominguez of Business Performance USA. I'm joined today by my partner, colleague, and good friend, Dr. Jeff Stewart. We thank you for joining us today. Our topic is, of course, the 8 cultural conflicts that prevent success. And I'm really happy to be presenting this webinar today. And that may seem a bit of a contradiction because nobody's happy about conflict in the workplace. In fact, it's a great source of frustration and stress in our lives. But the reason I'm happy is that we'll be learning today that conflict actually can be reversed and leveraged to be a competitive edge. So we acknowledge that conflict is really ever present. It's how we manage it and ultimately the healthy culture we create in our workplace, which is really going to make the difference. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And Jeff, if you can just skip to the next slide, that'll be great. And let me introduce some folks here. I am Victor Dominguez, there on the left, co-founder and currently the executive director of BP USA. We are a nonprofit, executive volunteer-driven organization. Our mission is really to help folks with their career development and help organizations optimize their performance so that everybody wins and prospers, from employees to customers to community as well. You can see Jeff there, Dr. Jeff Stewart, co-founder as well. Jeff he's a Fortune 50 guy, a lot of experience in the C-suite and on the board level with national and global firms. He's a consultant today, a speaker, mentor, coach, good friend, and just a really smart guy. So we do want to make sure that this event today is worth your time. And again, when I say that we're here to serve you at Business Performance USA, we really mean that. And this webinar today is going to create awareness of what can be done to prevent negative conflict and reverse that. And that's why we want you to ask questions with the questions or the chat feature, whatever is most intuitive for you. Just ask us a question. We will have a couple of polls to get a sense of what's going on in your organization. And always follow up with us afterwards, because once you create awareness, what do you do next? Well, next we need to prove to you that this really works and help you take steps forward to really create a healthy organization for you. So Victor at businessperformanceusa.org is a great way to get a hold of me. And on the next slide, let's just jump right into it. And let's look at really the 2 categories here of cultural awareness and business process, both conflicts. But it's important to understand that we're starting our understanding here with this webinar from a negative point of view. But like I said, a healthy culture and effective process is really the solution to conflict as well. So we will be looking at the dark side of this, but you can flip that coin, and the very same category, if you will, is really the solution. Starting with the cultural awareness, it's really a lack of cultural awareness. Essentially, people behaving poorly is what is most commonly thought of as conflict. Now, personally, we've all been there, but I find this just so belligerent behavior, so abhorrent and completely unacceptable, as most people do. But we'll deal with these poor behaviors, if you will. But the truth is that most conflict comes from poor business processes, which fail and frustrate good employees who generally really want to do their best. So perhaps interestingly enough, our topic today is really going to be about the business processes that both create conflict and how you can reverse those processes and improve your culture, if you will. So a couple of takeaways for this to explain why conflict can actually be good. We believe, Dr. Jeff and I, that conflict is healthy to competition. Internal competition to rationally put forward the best ideas help a company win at external competition, meaning when your employees can put forward a new idea and advocate that idea based on its principles, its values, its logic, its rationale, and the way it serves the strategy, that's a good thing. Now, somebody else may have an idea too, and that's often the case. How do 2 people with 2 ideas resolve it? Well, if you don't have healthy ways to work out that conflict, you've got negative conflict. if you can have a system to positively work out the best of these two ideas, then you are creating a competitive advantage. You've flipped the coin on conflict and made it positive for you. Just a quick example. Some organizations do this really well. I hope you don't hate the Seahawks, because my example is the Seattle Seahawks. I'm not a fan directly, but I do admire what Coach Carroll does there. He has what he calls Competition Wednesday, where rookies compete with seasoned veterans. The best player gets on the field, and that's really good for the rookies because they feel they have a shot and they can contribute. It's really good for the veterans because they know they have to give it their very best in order to retain that starting position. Coach Carroll uses that conflict and that competition to improve the competitiveness of his team. One way I do this is I'm an agency guy, marketing, advertising, brand, and I create competition or conflict, if you will, among graphic designers. Graphic designers are an interesting bunch, sometimes hard to manage. Creative thinkers, that's good, but they can get lost in that creativity. I have always had an open Friday portfolio review where I bring in new designers just to introduce them around, get to know people, to network. And I'll tell you, when the graphic designers see new designers walk through the door, they kind of tighten up their act a little bit. That competition keeps them on their toes. Another way to think of competition is incubator teams. I've done this a lot with a global company I work for, CB Richard Ellis. We tried an experiment in one office in Los Angeles, another experiment in Chicago, and another experiment in Tampa Bay. We're all three solving towards the same issues, but we're allowed to do it in our own unique way. That's an incubator environment. And it's remarkable how distinctive the solutions are when you create that competition within an organization to reveal the best process and best idea. That does create conflict if you don't have the right culture. So, Jeff, moving on for the next slide, we're going to plow through this. This is admittedly a real beast of a comment here. It's actually just one sentence that we broke into 4 parts to make you understand it. But let's just step back without getting into all this detail first. What this really talks about here is a classic problem, because we talk about business process failures. So, the number one, we have a business processes are failing the employees. What happens? Employees get frustrated, start acting rudely. Okay, is just a broad general description because they're frustrated. They can't do their very best. And so what happens is those rude actions, if you will, those bad behaviors, poisons the process for fixing the failed process, which started the whole cycle. So it's just, that's what happens with conflict. You get into this cycle, this vicious, repetitive environment where people get frustrated, people act poorly. Because people act poorly, people get more frustrated, and so on and so on. So this is really where I welcome you to pick up the phone and call me or email me, and let's apply this root cause analysis to your organization, your company. Let's see where the conflicts are really occurring. So we talk about poor social communication, if you will. That's just people communicate through thoughts, words, gestures, and deeds, which are most important. And these communicate to others a disrespect, a discord, a disbelief in the management, and dishonesty, which of course is the worst of all. But we take all these poor behaviors and put it into a poor social communication. It's an ethical issue. And so that's our category for packing in all of this bad behavior, if you will, poor social communication. Now, when you have that, you erode trust and collaboration. People aren't willing or able to share knowledge among teams. And when that happens, that disables individuals or the teams they work in from advocating positively for their unique work-related requirements. And this is a big issue. Somebody from marketing goes over to sales and tells sales, hey, we need to manage our leads in this way. And sales, look, you're marketing, get out of my department, get out of my world. What do you know? That's an inability to positively advocate for what marketing needs, or sales advocating to marketing what they need, and it just goes on and on and on. If you don't have trust, you can't sit down with your coworkers and say, hey, it would really help if we can do X, and if, and do that together. If people can't advocate for their work requirements or what they need to do a good job, you're going to just exasperate conflict. You're not going to solve it. And that's really, really critical, because if you don't have problem-solving skills, you cannot change and adapt the processes that are failing you in the first place. So we'll talk about it later, but these problems really do come out of the inability to change the processes of the world around them. So again, we welcome you to talk about this with us. The recommendations for this is, first of all, every employee should understand the process that comes before their work effort, who's doing stuff before them, and what happens after their work product is handed off to the next person. We call this a value chain, and problems need to be solved or conflict addressed along this chain, and that often does involve other departments. You have to have trust to be able to communicate well in order to do that. So it's a cross-training solution, if you will. Jeff, if you'd be so kind, on the next slide, we'll talk about the 8 cultural conflicts that prevent sustainable success. We're going to get into these in detail, but generally, and we welcome input from the audience, but generally we see these 8 categories really can encapsulate what happens, what it feels like, and the source of bad behavior, chronic coworker conflict and dysfunction. The top 5 are really regards to business processes. The bottom 3 are related to just bad behaviors, if you will. Now, the truth is all of these can be managed with business processes, but 1 through 5 certainly have a lot to do with the leadership of the organization. And we'll get into that, because we believe that really the goal of every organization is to figure out what works well and continually improve on that effort. This creates sustainable success, and it's the only way to serve your stakeholders. So let's just jump in. If I haven't explained it yet, but we're going to do a poll here, and I'd like to get feedback from the audience. We have a lot of people today from diverse industries as well. Jeff, if you can hop to the next slide, I'll initiate the poll. And we're asking, of the following 5 business process conflicts, what do you deal with most frequently? Now, these are from the business side of it. Workaround we haven't explained, but do you have employees that have to circumvent your structure and system? Just click on one of the buttons there, if you'll be so kind. And assumptions. Are mistakes being made because people are assuming that somebody's doing X, but they really did Y, and then there's a disconnect. Backsliding, where you're making progress, but you keep falling back to the production goals you had last quarter, last year. Lack of accountability kind of speaks for itself, or conflict within organizational silos. So if you could just click on a button, we've got some results coming in. We appreciate that very much. And we're going to close out this poll quickly. This is just going to help me to get an understanding of what problems you are having. Assumption is actually rising to it, which is interesting. And we're going to close this out. Essentially, we've got the smallest percentage is workaround at 5. The assumptions is at 50%. Half of the folks in this audience, which is significant, are working with assumptions, being challenged with assumptions. Worker A thinks worker B is doing it this way and it's coming out that way. Lack of accountability is 25%. So right between assumptions and lack of accountability, that accounts for 75%. Organizational silos, conflict there accounts for 15%. Backsliding making up the difference. Thanks, folks. Appreciate that. That helps me very much. And one last, this is a poll for the belligerent side of behaviors. And what do you see in terms of conflicts? People blaming one another, people acting out of fear, chronic dysfunctional behavior. Chronic dysfunctional behavior is a consistent pattern of people acting poorly, if you will. Fear is rising really fast in our polls, if you will. Fear is a huge, strong driver for conflict. And the way we set up these 8 categories, they actually kind of get progressively worse, if you will. I do have a question. It's not really a question. Obviously, in reference to my Seahawks comment, a Bronco fan seemed to emerge out of the crowd. No surprise that they're rabid there in Denver. And hey, I'm a Bronco fan, but not unless they're playing the Raiders, but that's another story. Fear is really rising 65%. Chronic dysfunctional behavior is next, and blame is third. Thanks, Jeff. We're going to close out of this. So again, fear is number one. Chronic dysfunctional behavior, people doing poor things over and over and over again, tend to be the problem. Thank you for that input, everyone. And we're happy to show these results later. If you contact me at victor@businessperformanceusa.org. I'll send you the deck. I'll send you the results. Jeff, if you can hop to the next slide, that'd be great. We're going to get into these 8 items, and then we're going to close this out because, again, what we're trying to do is create awareness for where your problems originate from. And as managers, business owners, and senior executives, what can you do about all of these 8 categories? A workaround, I put first. It's generally not considered a problem in my experience, but it's actually kind of insidious. This is, in my opinion, actually the most prevalent business process conflict, and at the same time, it hides in plain sight. So think about, for instance, and again, if you want to ask questions, go right ahead via chat or a question feature. Think about the employee of the month, the person that gets rewarded for, she always manages to get things done. She just knows where to go, what to do, where to find resources, how to solve emergencies. And that person is often celebrated for their good work, and in a sense they should be. I mean, we want employees like that can just figure out how to get stuff done. I mean, GSD, get stuff done. So this person is innovative. They just have a body of knowledge that they have. They just are aware how to pull the levers and get stuff done. But the truth is, if you have any employee who are circumventing the system to get things done, you have a problem with the system. And you also perhaps don't quite have the culture yet where you're really sharing knowledge and information and resources. I mean, wouldn't you want your entire organization to know how to get stuff done, to know where the resources lie, to have the knowledge of how to solve problems? So just, when you see an employee doing something, ask them a simple question. Ask them, how did you know that you should do that? And if they answer, well, I just know, that's great in a sense, but it's actually bad for your processes, your system, your structure, because that person has just figured out how to work around the system. You need a system that supports people, not something that gets in their way and needs to be circumvented in order for them to do their job. Look for workarounds. Look for people that are clever about getting stuff done, and then ask them to share with employees, first of all, their knowledge. How do you know how to do that? And why, and the most important is, why do you have to do that? Why do you have to jump through those hoops and circumvent the system? So next on assumptions, the next slide, Jeff, we'll moving on to number 2. And this was high in the polls. So it's certainly worth looking at. This is kind of a semi-hidden, insidious problem as well. And this is where deadlines are blown and whatnot. So now we all know, of course, what the definition of assume is, right? So we don't quite need to go there and use that language. But again, eliminating assumptions is solved through good communication skills. Employee A is not talking to employee B. Employee A hasn't been cross-trained and has knowledge of what employee is doing, and vice versa. So again, the solution here is we want to train employees to know their stuff, okay, and communicate that effectively. It's not just enough to really know what they do. They have to be able to articulate what they do to others, to their coworkers, and even to folks in other departments, if you will, that value chain that exists between silos, departmental silos. R&D, is out there in the marketplace and figuring out what products and services. Then they have to work with manufacturing and marketing to find the right niche. And then marketing needs to work with sales, and sales needs to work with customer service, and customer service needs to loop back all of that customer feedback and again and again. There's a lot of handoffs there, the baton handoff, if you will, and look for assumptions every time a work product or service is handed off to one another. That's where assumptions occur. And you really do need to solve them. Again, good communication is the key. And assumptions are often the source of blame. Hey, I thought you were going to do it this way. And then the finger pointing starts. But what's key with assumption is to develop a culture that sees problems as opportunities. That's really, really huge. Because people are fearful, to use that word, of addressing assumptions because they don't want to stick their head in the sand. They don't want to conflict or confront other people. They don't want to surface a problem. They just assume, well, I think this is right. The customer asks for this capacity, but they're going to get that capacity, and it's a real problem. And when an assumption triggers a failure, at that exact moment, you need to work out the communication in real time. Where did it happen? Test for an alternative solution. That's why I say it's really important to look at a problem as an opportunity to better yourselves, better your skills, better the company, better the experience for the customer. And you're gonna see these assumptions go away. And the whole key to this is to really pull extra capacity out of your organization. If you're struggling for resources, work on assumptions. And when you do, you're going to find that you have more resources to do what you need to do, because assumptions suck resources out of your organization by making mistakes that could have been avoided. And on the next slide, I'm checking for chats and questions. I see none, although I do see the Bronco fan still out there. And backsliding, number 3 in the 8, and we're building up in terms of severity, sort of, at least in my opinion. But what's relevant is what you're experiencing in your workplace, not really my opinion, to tell you the truth. So on backsliding, have you ever heard the term? You probably have, flavor of the month, if you will, or the phrase initiative fatigue. This is a problem often for companies that are just always throwing the new shiny thing in the pan and serving it up to their employees. You might get incremental or marginal improvement for a while everybody is, monitoring you and beating the drums and blowing horns and making a big fanfare out of the latest initiative. But to maintain that success, to maintain that increased productivity is actually really, really difficult. Okay, so I like to avoid flavors of the month. I like to avoid, blowing horns and all of that. And if you have an organization, particularly if you're a new manager coming in and there's just initiative fatigue, it's like, okay, what flavor of the month is this new guy going to come up with? Be cautious about that, okay? So the reason I believe, I think Dr. Jeff would concur, that the reason for backsliding is that managers feel they need to continually apply pressure to get results, but that's not sustainable. Ever increasing pressure only leads to more conflict, and it leads to finger pointing, blame, and assumptions and everything else. That pressure you just can't put it on an employee forever, and that's why you get backsliding.
Well, Victor, if I can jump in.
Of course.
You pulled my name up, and you're going to get my my point of view. Backsliding typically occurs in a situation where people have made gains and for some reason or another decide that the old way was better. And maybe it's not an obvious decision. Maybe it's just slipping into a habit, a pattern of behavior that is comfortable. People make gains by stepping out of their comfort zones, not by being in their comfort zones. Typically, we flatline or have a table on the performance measure when we are comfortable and not when we're uncomfortable. There's a certain sense of, people are not going to like this word, but discomfort that is necessary to get ahead of the game, to take the lead from your team and to move your team down the field toward the goal. And those of you who've got sports background, and I heard those earlier comments, will understand right away that without taking extra pains, we say in English, you're simply not going to get where you want to faster than the other person or better than the other person or in a way that others will appreciate for whatever the outcome may be, whether it's a goal or whether it's an increase in revenue or an improvement in efficiency or whatever. So I do a lot of culture change, and the comment about pressure is well made, Victor. What happens when you change something is pressure builds. Pressure to either resist or pressure to progress. And resistance is normal. It sort of warms up the environment. And if you can make it cordial and warm, it's a whole lot better than being uncordial or cold-shouldered and under pressure. So cordial warmth in the midst of change is what happens when people play well together. And when it's not cordial, that is, things are dissonant, things don't resonate correctly, the sense of working together is not present, then the discomfort takes over, and you may get to your goal, and you may actually have a moment of celebration, but the next morning you don't want to do that again, And let me just stop right there and suggest that backsliding is not so much a matter of converting yourself to another point of view or somebody else, as much as it is working well together and converting the moment for value.
Dr. Jeff, that's spot on. I'm really glad you brought that up. I was thinking that last week when I was preparing this, but I neglected to bring it up. You're spot on. To me, it gets back to change. A resistance to changes, and I think this is my words that I think echo your sentiment. Resistance to change is really a disbelief that what they're changing to is better than what they currently have. And it could be as simple as that, or it could be even insidious. You mean I'm going to have to work harder if we initiate this? I kind of want to backslide to working as hard as I used to. But either way, that it's a change management issue. You're exactly right. And it's important to show that the change is essential in a company. And this gets back again to flipping the culture switch, which I believe the key is to motivate employees with the purpose of the overall company, the purpose of serving stakeholders and others. Why does that company exist? That's a reason for change. Give them control over their processes and responsibilities. If you're initiating change, bring in the people who are doing the work, the worker bees, and let them participate and solve the problem and work out the new processes. They'll be much more bought into it. And then nurture them in a learning and growing environment. Show them that they're not just changing and learning and growing for the company, but for themselves. They need to always consider their career growth. If you do these things, money won't be the biggest motivation for your employees. They will be inspired with the purpose of your company, and backsliding will radically, greatly diminish. Jeff, if you can bring us to the next slide, lack of accountability, that would be great. I see a typo here, and I always see one during this is not number 8, but it doesn't matter. This is lack of accountability, which scored high in our polling, and it's really frustrating. And it's something goes like, sorry about that, I forgot to cancel my phone. It goes like, he always. How often do you see that? This is a source of deep frustration with people who care about work and work hard. The analogy I use, and it's my reference, and Jeff, certainly yours, is that soldiers, because I always look at the most extreme situations to really understand human behavior sometimes. Soldiers don't fight for God, country, and mom. They fight for each other. Employees will fight and work hard and be accountable for each other, but they won't for a slacker. Okay, so don't think that the annual performance review will solve this issue. It won't. Coworkers are essentially reviewing each other every day, even hour by hour. We all know who comes to a meeting prepared. We all know who gets their work done. The peer pressure, in a sense, of a positive culture won't tolerate somebody who is lacking accountability. But it's also up to the managers to get out there on the floor and see who is real with it, and understand who is backsliding. And it just gets down to the classic in business that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So, dashboards, CRM tools, all of these things impose accountability, but be careful that you do that with a sense of purpose and, like Jeff said, a reason to grow and a reason to adopt new processes, because dashboards and CRM tools and all of this technology to monitor people's activities and productivity can be viewed as just more pressure, the foot on the neck of the employee to force them and pressure them to get more work done. Do you concur with that?
I'll jump in on that a little bit. Accountability is, of course, metrics are key. Without metrics, the organizational culture won't have a sense of its size, shape, scaling, and reach. And so scope, scale, and reach are key factors in any growing organization, and accountability is key to that on the metrics. But there are other facets in this which you're going to get to later that are sometimes not just individual behaviors, but are indeed group and sometimes entire divisional behaviors. And they are more in the range of human emotions that are not channeled correctly. So helping people build a sense of intelligence with regard to each other's emotional context is important. Now, one of the ways we do that as human beings is we tell stories. So, for example, something didn't go quite as expected, and you say, how do you account for that? And what you mean is, tell me what happened and tell me what you think about that and what went wrong. So there's a story that's going to be told there. When you tell a story, you need to be good at it. So it's not making up a story that's important. What is important is that when you tell it, it has a certain power and authenticity that makes the reality of the problem something everybody can deal with. So the ability to account for it includes metrics. It includes substantial references and documentation. It includes an understanding of critique, which is to say being able to deliver the good, the bad, and the ugly with accountability and alternatives, and you just go on there. So in the accountability, you have to always have the alternatives. It doesn't help anyone to say, well, that sucks. What really helps is to say, man, I heard that sucking sound coming for 3 months, and here's why. I was turning around the corner at the water cooler, and people were complaining about the process breaking down when we threw the ball over the transom to the other department. Well, how come nobody reported that? How come nobody told anybody outside their team? How come? Well, somebody got too comfortable, and somebody perhaps was not in a fully accountable mode. Maybe they went collusive and they said, well, give them enough rope to hang themselves. You know, these are unhealthy behaviors in a corporate culture, that is, in a culture of teamwork and working together, collaboration. So let me leave it to you, Victor, to pull that into Business Performance USA, where we honor the worker bee, and that means co-working is the way to be inside an organization.
Thank you, Jeff. Spot on. I appreciate that. Just a couple quick housekeeping issues here. I'm checking my questions, and always feel free to submit those. And there may have been a glitch on the polling feature way back 10, 15 minutes ago. I apologize for that. It may have been a miscue on the screen sharing. I do apologize if that was the case, that people couldn't see the poll. But Jeff, if we can roll on. See, I'm just trying to be accountable for when I don't do things perfectly. At least acknowledge how we might be able to make up that gap. Organizational silos. This one just, boy, it gets me, okay? The organizational silos are sometimes called shared services, but they're not. And I'm sorry, I'm just checking things again. It really comes down to a lack of cooperation, really, between these silos. And like I said, this may be the greatest source of conflict. It's perhaps, obviously, it's just in my experience, but in terms of wasted resources, missed deadline, blown budgets, a lack of teamwork has just got to stop. And it stops with the realization that all departments are interconnected and interdependent. Now, I often have conversations with my clients about their silos, and this is a conversation I have with the operations guy and then cascading down through the organization, that you think of a department, could be finance, operations, marketing, production, sales, as a supply and demand. Certainly, I got to put IT in that department. Each department is really working in a supply and demand environment, just like the marketplace itself. So you would ask yourself, does your department have good customer service, or do other departments want to outsource services rather than work with yours? And I've seen this with marketing. We're marketing. We can't get along with IT. We say, well, we're just going to go out and buy the services, or we'll bring in somebody else that can get it done for us on time and on budget and whatnot. That's not the right way to go. So, and even more so is, as a department head, are you willing to share resources among other departments to help balance the workload? Meaning, can you lend somebody an employee if your demands on that department are so great, you're putting a strain on their resources? Can you supply resources for them? Do you have liaisons between your departments who have been cross-trained? We've had a lot of success with training a liaison between marketing and IT, or between marketing and sales. And that liaison needs to learn both worlds. And they need to learn the language that both worlds use. And they need to be able to articulate what the consumer of IT services need, and then but also learn enough about IT so that you can make reasonable demands within a reasonable time frame and within a reasonable budget.
Hey, Victor,
Yeah.
one of the things that I've noticed in organizations when you're moving people through and cross-training them is that they tend to make good liaisons. So liaising is a skill, and it's a skill that needs to be learned. And if you learn it early, you won't be perceived as somebody who's just sort of carrying messages and getting shot whenever somebody doesn't like it. You know, the wounded have to be carried off the battlefield, and this is, well, that's my ethic. You don't leave anybody on the field, and you always return them to where they came. But why be wounded, you know? False heroism is the end result of people who don't learn to liaise correctly in the beginning and don't learn to report correctly on either side of their responsibility. So it's important to understand that when you deal with somebody in a team, you may turn out being the liaison between two people on your own team in order to advance the process that you're trying to improve.
Bingo. So thank you, Jeff. We'll keep rolling on so we can manage this webinar out. And always contact me with questions about your organizational silos, how to improve those. Blame. Well, we've all experienced that. It actually didn't rate high on the polling, which is good. But blame and sometimes lack of accountability work hand in hand. If you're not going to be accountable, you might be blaming somebody other. Blame also occurs, of course, when poor communication is practiced. But most importantly, blaming others is really a reaction to fear, which is our next topic. Even still worse, in a blaming environment, it's not possible to see problems as solutions. So when somebody is in front of you blaming, like you said, can you, like Jeff said, in the analogy is talking to an employee, when they're asked, how do you account for that? How do you account for that result or those behaviors, those actions? This is where the blame comes in. Jeff, do you have any input on that?
Oh, yeah. Blame is a game. It's here's one way people are probably well aware that it occurs. Oh, well, that didn't work out. Well, let's spread the blame around so nobody gets dinged on their this, that, or the other thing. Okay. First of all, blame as a game is a loser's game. The winner's game is the game where you step up and own it. Among the top brass, anywhere you go, owning the problem is the first thing you're trained to do in order to organize those around you, including all the physical and material and financial resources, to solve it. So blame is a loser's game. To win, you have to own the game. So you don't, in fact, play a game when you own. You play, period. And the game is what other people see. So underlying blame is a fear of what others will see or think or do with respect to what has occurred. And that's where you were pointing at the fear problem, and I quite agree with you. There's really only one pure antidote to fear, Victor. And we talk in business about trust, building trust, breeding trust, putting results where they need to be, when they need to be there, delivering the goods. We sometimes describe really reliable people as good goods. They're the best, whatever they say, they deliver. They don't waste your time. They don't waste words. They don't waste a moment, even in notice. They simply tell you and get it done. And that kind of commitment level sometimes leads us to think that they're so task-oriented they don't have any respect for people or any desire to be around them, but it's actually the opposite. Getting it done is the way you respect people on the job, and you share the success by working with the team you're in. This is the opposite of blame. Then everybody owns the win. And, team spirit soars. The biggest challenge for leaders and managers when team spirit is soaring is what some people call irrational exuberance. There's no reason to be that happy, that's setting us up for a fall. We need to be a little more realistic, and you'll hear that sometimes from people when they're excited, but they also know that we've got serious challenges still ahead of us.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. And your cue up from blame to fear is perfect. So on the next slide, we'll be addressing the last two here and quickly wrapping this up. But fear, you just spoke about fear, Jeff, quite well. I've always said courage is the antidote to fear, but you do need the right kind of environment where this can come out. And what's interesting is I see this on all levels of organizations. Fear causes frontline employees to avoid leadership opportunity, stepping up and doing the classic three: do the right thing uh, for the right reasons and in the right way. If you have a frontline employee who sees a problem, particularly with a customer, and you allow them to do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons, you're going to really eliminate a fearful environment. And they're not always going to get it right. Maybe they didn't quite do it in the right way. Maybe they got 2 out of 3, but you still honor that frontline employee's choice, because they overcame fear. They stepped up. They didn't have, quote, the authority to make that decision, but it was the right thing to do.
Well, Victor, this is where our values in professional life and in personal life kind of get commingled, and there is no sharp border, as you know, between the values you hold dear as a person and the value that you create in an organization. There are good reasons to be careful about how we talk about values, mostly because of collusive behavior and the fact that one person's highest values may not be the same as another's highest values, or dearest values, or unrestricted values, however you want to talk about that. The main thing really is this: when you want to build trust, you want to put results in place so that what you're building has a life of its own. In fact, it will breed and spread through the organization, just like love at a dadgum good concert. I've been to some wonderful rock concerts, and you can feel the love when it's there, and it moves through the crowd just like a wave at the ocean. Fear is the undertow that will pull you out to sea and leave you drowning. And
Right.
what you want to do is avoid that undertow and dispel it at all costs. So what I'm trying to get at is this: when you act with confidence, you also act in good faith. And if people are not going to deliver the goods, then they are subverting themselves and also threatening to subvert the team and the organization's results. The loss of good faith among people is the way you erode trust. And what we want to do is be sure that good faith or confidence in the team and in others around you is always present. Now, I come out of the Marines, as you know, so we have a phrase that's a little fancy, although you wouldn't think jarheads are very fancy except on their uniforms. And the phrase is French. It's esprit de corps. And what that means is the body of all people in a unit is one. That's why we call it a unit. And the spirit of that unit is everything. So when you said a soldier will fight for another soldier, you're absolutely right. It is the relationship, the relational element of that team, which is why people actually win. And they are highly accountable when they do that and go to great lengths to make sure they have the skills and the expertise and the resources and the supply all in place in order to win the game.
Exactly. And on that, we need to wrap up real soon here. And but in that regards, what you just spoke to, I think one of the best ways to find out who is accountable, who is not fearful, who is a leader, who is courageous, who contributes, all of that. Try a little experiment and just let your employees pick their own team. Look at who they pick. They're not going to pick the fearful, blaming, unaccountable employees. They're going to pick the bold, courageous ones that are going to hold up their own. And those are the ones they want to fight for. The more autonomous you make your workforce, trust their decision making and their collaboration, the more you're going to reveal the problems and the more you're going to see who contributes the exact opposite. And on our last slide, Jeff, if you will, chronic dysfunctional behavior, we really know this, and it's what people most often think of. The the abuse, the yelling, discrimination, sexual harassment, all horrific things. And if they happen chronically, you really need to manage it. Even an employee that won't show up on time, I put in this behavior. That is not showing up on time is not seemingly, it doesn't compare to the other things I mentioned, but it's a true lack of respect for their employees. And if it's happening chronically, you have a problem. So what I like to do when it comes to conflict is quickly parse out what is a real legitimate business issue, which I contend most of the conflicts are, and what is just chronic dysfunctional behavior. If you have these issues, you probably will be teaming with HR. You'll probably go into what I call a three chances and you're out kind of environment. It's like reset the clock. This is what your expectations are. After the second next failure, you're out of here, and that's tough love. But the best thing you can do for good employees is not to tolerate chronic dysfunctional behavior. And on that, in the interest of time, we'll close this out. Jeff, you could just wrap up on the last slide. And we do thank you for your time. Again, the more you ask us, the more we can help you. And this is how you can get a hold of us, Victor at businessperformanceusa.org. Become a member. It's free, complimentary, just as this webinar is. All you need to do is go to our website, look for the button with the B, and click on it. Just a little bit of information, and voila, you're there. And you can watch over 65 webinars that we've recorded in the past. Watch a webinar, ask me questions. If I can't answer the question, I'll find the right person who can. And we will accomplish two things. We will improve your organization so that they can prosper successfully, sustainably, and your entire stakeholder model will win. We call that employees, customers, investors, industry, and community. We want everyone to win and prosper, and particularly you. We want to see your career flourish. So brainstorm with us, and let's make some great things happen. Jeff, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it very much. And to all of our guests, thank you very much. It's been an honor to speak with you today. Take care and have a good day.